Welcome to this installment of 10 Minutes of Tech. Today we'll be talking about Watson Analytics using dashDB. For this segment, we're first going to review the process overview. In this, we're going to start off with some raw data. We're going to load it into a dashDB service instance on Bluemix. We're going to then use Watson Analytics and connect to this dashDB. And then finally, we're going to analyze the data that's part of that data segment. There are several steps to this process, which includes first creating a Bluemix account if you do not already have one. You may do so at bluemix.net and sign up for a 30-day trial account. Next, we're going to log into Bluemix. We're going to create the dashDB service, and then we're going to load the data from the source CSV file. Note the connections that are part of the credentials for this service, because these credentials will then be used later on when we're using Watson Analytics. Next, we're going to log into Watson Analytics. We're going to create a connection to that dashDB that we created on Bluemix. And then finally, we're going to visualize and analyze the data that's part of that data set. First, let's go ahead and log into our Bluemix account, and then we'll create the instance of dashDB. I've signed into my Bluemix account, and I'm going to go to the hamburger menu, select it, select Services, and then Dashboard. From here, I can click Create Service. From these services, we're going to look at the data and analytics, and we're going to scroll down to the dashDB for analytics and select that option. dashDB for Analytics service will appear, and we have some options that we can set up for this. First, we're going to set up the service name. In this case, we'll leave it as the default. Specify the amount of nodes that you want to have in your dashDB cluster. In this case, we'll leave it as the default. And then the data center location. Depending upon specificity and location, you may want to change this, but for this example, we'll keep it the same. And then finally, if you have Oracle compatibility issues that you need to contend with, you can select to have that compatibility option on or off. In our case, we are going to leave that off. Next, we'll click Create, and the service will be created. Now that the service is created, we'll be redirected, and we'll see here on the screen that we have this new service that's there. So let's go ahead and click on the service, and it'll bring us into the configuration options and settings. In the configuration settings, we have Manage, Service Credentials, and Connections. Connections will be any existing connection that are bound to this service for the data. We have Service Credentials. In this case, we want to look at the service credentials that are going to be created, so we'll click New Credential. We'll leave the default name as Credentials. And if there's any configuration parameters or inline that you need to be able to set up, you can do so now. In this case, we're going to leave the default, and we'll click Add. The credentials will be created. Using the down arrow on View Credentials, we can see all the information that's part of that credentials, including port, name, database, all the components that will be necessary for connecting remotely or binding the service. We want to copy this credentials and save it into a notepad or some other text editor for later use when we're in Watson Analytics. Next, we're going to click on Manage. In the Manage, we'll open up the actual dashDB console, and it'll open up in a new tab. And from here, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create the instance of the database and load the data into the service. Within the dashDB console, we have three immediate options that we can do: load data, work with tables, or run SQL. At this point, the first thing that we're going to do is actually load data. So we'll click on the load option. There are several options for how you're going to load the data. In this case, we're going to choose desktop because we're going to load it from a CSV file. So we'll click Load. From the desktop load, you have the option of being able to use IBM Aspera as a load mechanism with the FAST protocol. In this case, what I'm going to do is not use that, but I'm actually going to use the standard drag and drop. So I'll take the insurance sample data file that I'll be using, drag it from my directory, and drop it into this section. It's going to begin uploading the file, and it'll start processing it. Once the file is successfully uploaded, you can look at some of the characteristics. Does the first row contain a name for the columns? You can choose yes or no. Any code page information, how the files are separated, in this case, whether it is a comma separated tab or colon or something else, and then any other information that's corresponding to that. Now that it's loaded, we want to be able to go on and choose the target. To do this, we'll scroll down and click Preview. And it'll give us a preview of the data that we just loaded. The reason for the preview is to ensure that the options that we selected for that CSV file are correct. Looking at this information, it appears to be correct, and it's nicely formatted. So we'll scroll down and click Next. Now we're going to choose a target. In this case, this is a brand new dashDB, so what we'll have to do is choose to create a table. Once we've chosen to create a table, it's going to create a preview of the table automatically for us. So as it's going through, we'll wait for its completion. Once it's done, you'll see where it's giving the column header IDs, the data type that it's part of, and any other corresponding information. At this point, we can change the table name as well to anything we like, but in this case, I'm going to go ahead and leave it as Florida Insurance Sample. Go ahead and click Finish. To complete the process, the tables and the database components will be created, and we'll move on to the next step. Now that everything is successfully completed, we'll see that the table is completed. We see the schema that was used, which was automatically created for this database that we or table that we imported. We can see how many rows were committed, what was loaded, what was rejected, and what was skipped. In this case, the load was completely successful. On the right-hand side, you could look at the logs or any other information that you'd like. Next, what we're going to do is we're actually going to go into Watson Analytics and actually connect to this data source to be able to use it for visualizations and analytics. Preparing for use of Watson Analytics, the first thing that we're going to do is to log into Watson Analytics, which can be done at watsonanalytics.com. Next, we're going to create a connection to the Dash database using the credentials that we created in the first steps, and then we're going to visualize and analyze the data. In my browser, I open up a new tab and I log into Watson Analytics. From here, we can look at three different modes that we have: Data, Discover, and Display. At this point, what I'm going to do is log on to my account, looking at my account settings, and within there, I'm going to begin the connection process. Within my account settings, I choose Data Connections. From there, it indicates the connections that I currently have. I'm going to click on the plus sign to create a new connection. The options available to me for creating the connections are now displayed. Everything from Amazon Redshift through IBM connections, through MySQL Compose, and other options for Salesforce, Sybase, Teradata as well. In this case, I'm going to choose IBM dashDB, and then I'll begin setting the properties for this connection. I click Create after I've entered in all the information for the connection. In this case, I'm calling it my dashDB connection, and from the list of information that I was provided for me from the dashDB, I've now populated the appropriate fields, and I will click Create to create the connection. Now with my connection created, I'm going to go back to the dashboard and begin analyzing and reviewing the data. To begin, I'll return back to the main screen by clicking on the IBM Watson Analytics header. Next, click on New Data. And then once that data options come up, I'll click on Connection. And it'll populate the new connection that we just created to the dashDB. Click on the dashDB connection. And now we have the schemas that were populated. I'm going to go ahead and select the -14461 schema that we selected. Here's the table that's associated to that schema. I'm going to check the box, and in this case, I have now the sample data that we have that's there. Here's a view of that sample data, and I'm able to look at and validate that. I can now close that out. After reviewing the sample, I have two options now: Shape Before or Upload Now. For demonstrations, we'll click on Shape Before. Within the shaping, it allows me to do any necessary transformations of the data on this that we have. So I have multiple operations I can perform, I can cleanse the data, and I can organize the data. In this case, we're not going to do this for this example. And what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and import the data. Selecting this upload, I'll upload my data that I have, and I need to save it as a data set. In this case, I'll go ahead and call it my data set and click OK. The data set will now be imported from the dashDB for use within Watson Analytics. It'll return me to the actual tile window, and from there under personal, because again this is my personal data versus shared, you'll see that my data set is being created and loaded. Now that my data set is created, it will show me the quality of the data. Open up the data set to begin discovery. Within discovery, it automatically gives me some inquiries that it has. In this case, we'll look at the first one, which is what drives FR site deductible. For what drives EQ site limit is another option. In this, we see the three, and it gives you the relative strength additional breakdown. I'd like to thank you for joining us today in our 10 minutes of tech of looking at Watson Analytics with dashDB.